Welcome back, friends, to Thrive and Align Healing Podcast. This is Kim, and today I have a very special guest with me, Lindsey Mingo. She is my coach. I'm in her mastermind. I'm in her life membership. I'm in her 100K to 30 days. She is an amazing coach. She's very gifted. I love how her brain works. And so I wanted her to come on today to just talk about some of the things that we have worked through together that was very life-changing for me. There's been a couple things, like you've helped me treat myself with importance, which I was trying to action my way there. So that's been very freeing. But this concept that we're talking about today has also been, it's been one of the hurdles that has slowed me down. So I'll just jump into it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for being here. So most of you guys know, I've been in the life coach school world around Brooke and, all these big players that are making multi-millions of dollars. And we've also talked about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And you know that I grew up in a house with fixed mindset. So my brain is wired to look at other humans that are successful and say they are special. They have something different from me. They have a specific skill set that I don't have. They have special talents. Like, this is literally the example that was given to me growing up. Michael Jordan would have went to the NBA no matter what, because he was born with special talents, period. It didn't matter how much he practiced. Versus the growth mindsets, it's like Michael Jordan became Michael Jordan because of all the reps that he put in. So I look at a lot of you coaches that are $1 million businesses, multiple six figures, and it's like, well, Lindsey's really charismatic. She has a very friendly personality. She has this brain that thinks in possibility. I don't have those things. I'm never going to be successful.
Such a painful story, but I think it's one that, and this is why we wanted to have this conversation, but one that a lot of people have. Like, we see whoever it is, like other people, and we consider them other than us and more special and more unique than us. And we kind of chalk up their success or their results to that.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be so enlightening for people.
Yeah. And it's like not something I could ever really thought work my way out of, to be honest with you.
Oh, say more about that.
Because I have to it's such a well-worn neural pathway for me that has been, my RAS has found a lot of evidence to validate. And so I've also created models where I haven't been successful, or where I've maybe quit too early or something, if you will, to create more evidence to validate that one.
Well, and if you think about it, it's like the thought I just had, just from a different perspective, is that maybe the thought work did work. Like, you chipped away at it slowly, and it took you getting to a point where you were able to kind of hear the work that we've been doing and hear kind of the situation that we had and have it really land. Like, I always like to think of, I'm sure you describe neural pathway, like changing neural pathways in your own unique way, but I always think of it like walking in the snow in the same path your entire life. And like, of course, your brain just automatically going to walk down that path. And it's like, maybe the thought work didn't fully get you there, but you started to trot like off of that path in a new one, and started to just build a new path. But I think that's also an interesting perspective, because I think sometimes it does take, it's like you have to truly not believe the story in order to really like walk down that path and create a completely different perspective.
Yeah. And I think too, what was really helpful, like it was almost like that belief was encapsulated and protected by another, like a coping mechanism for me. And the coping mechanism was, I wanted to fit in and be accepted, because I think sometimes my brain thinks differently. And so it always tries to tell me that my brain is like everybody else's. Right? Like, we all are just like, we all think the same way. She just has access to different thoughts because she has a better brain or something. I don't
So
know, you know?
fascinating. It's like on both sides of the story.
Yes.
It was like, because you could also see that from a different lens and be like, well, if we all have the same brain, then that means anyone's capable of creating it. But it's like, it was like a double-edged sword. It didn't matter which way you turned. It was there to like hold something against you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it did because I would filter like, okay, we all have the same brain. We're all starting out from the same place. Right. And I think that that came from a victim mindset of trying not to feel like a victim. You know, because it
Mm.
is painful. Like if you are like in victim mindset and you do have evidence of why you should be in victim mindset, it's so painful. Like it's already very powerless. So you want to try to normalize yourself to be like other people so you don't feel
Yeah.
so oddballed out, othered.
Yeah.
Right? So then it was like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I, work my way there? Why can't I but I can't because she's special.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the idea, it's kind of like fear, right? If we're like trying to push away from fear,
Mhm.
our brain thinks that we're like avoiding it, when in reality the fear is still running the show, just like trying to push away from a victim mindset and just like resisting it and trying to like ignore it completely is it's
Yes.
still actually running the show and still impacting every single decision you make and every single result you create. And I
Yeah.
think you bring up a good point with that, because I'm huge. I mean, I think that's why we work so well together. And I think this is part of what has helped with so many shifts that you've made. But like one of my big things is responsibility, like taking 100% responsibility over yourself, over your life, over the results that you're creating. But I think there's a unique lens on this, that I actually think that in order to get to that place of responsibility, there are some moments where you do actually have to have space for like being a victim. Like you have to have compassion and um like be okay with being in that position, and not to the point where you're like indulging in it and like blaming it, but like I think compassion for situations, circumstances, and things in your life that have been hard. It's like, instead of ignoring the victim mentality or these situations, it's more like acceptance, I guess is what I would say. And then once you reach that acceptance, then you can really build off of it in a much more powerful way and be even more responsible over yourself and your life.
Yeah. And I think that was actually what the shift was for me. Because it
Mm.
is like I feel like I do a good job of taking responsibility, but I do think
Mm.
there wasn't boundaries in it. So then I was taking responsibility for everything,
Which is
right?
actually blame. Like I always say, there's a
Right.
difference between responsibility and blame, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Blaming yourself for things that aren't your fault, like that you don't have power over.
Yeah. And there leaves no room for compassion at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so do you want to tell the story of kind of how you got there? Or do you want me to tell it, or?
Let's do your version. They hear from me all the time.
Okay, well, it's so funny because I didn't know it was actually, the shift was happening in real time. We were just at our retreat and I
Yeah.
was talking about a situation where um someone was feeling afraid of their personal safety, and how I don't want to go into too much detail
Yep.
because it was a client and I
Yep.
didn't use her name or anything when we were even in the room. But um I was talking about how, she was feeling like personally, like her boundaries, like she wasn't actually safe as a human. And when I was describing the story, what I was explaining was how I was kind of questioning, when anyone thinks this way, like, are they actually not safe? Like, is that
Mhm.
actually their reality? Right. Because, of course, if you don't think you're safe, it triggers the fear in you. And like you respond from this very fight or flight like pattern and all of that. So I was just kind of like talking about the situation, and the way I was describing it, and Kim and I talked about this after the fact, I didn't realize was with so much compassion and love, knowing that like, oh my gosh, it would feel so awful to physically not feel safe, like that someone could actually attack you. But that based on my life circumstances, and if I'm getting confusing, let me know. But I haven't actually had, I'm very lucky, I would say, and I'm very grateful that I've never had situations in my life where I actually felt physically unsafe
Mhm.
and where someone's crossed a boundary with me. And so I'm able to think about the scenario very differently from like total love and compassion, but also from the place of possibility and like that the safety actually wasn't being challenged. It was kind of just an illusion in her mind, and that she actually can have total power over herself and the boundaries she sets and the safety that she ultimately creates for herself. So anyway, that might be a little confusing, but I was just talking about this whole scenario from this place of possibility and from this place of what Kim and I realized now and just kind of had a co-created like discovery is like this internal safety that I have just in general, because I've had great life circumstances that haven't put me in that position that allow me to think in just bigger possibilities. So then after the retreat, Kim messaged me on Instagram and she was like, oh my gosh, I just had this insane breakthrough. And we can talk about it from your lens too. But she was telling me how what she noticed is because of how safe I feel, because I haven't had those circumstances, I'm able to think of things in such a unique way and from this place of possibility. And that that offered her the lens that maybe you should describe it, but I'll just take it from my perspective. But that offer, it's kind of hard to describe your lens and my lens, but that offered you the lens that you do have circumstances and situations that contributed to you not feeling safe, and that is harder, that actually is something that has held you back, and not from this place of like a victim mentality, but from this place of compassion. Because to me, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, but you're kind of have been comparing all of us like we're starting at the exact same spot in a starting line, like if we're running a race, which isn't the case, right? Like for somebody who has like a really rough upbringing or has been told, like you said, your whole life that there are special people and then there are not special people, and you're not one of those special people. And so you're never going to be able to create what you want. Like it's not fair to put you at the same line as everybody else. And that doesn't have to be bad. That doesn't have to be wrong. That doesn't have to mean that you can't end up in the same position as the most successful people in the world, because that happens and that exists too. That possibility is there. But that also doesn't mean that you have to be hard on yourself or mad at yourself for maybe a new belief or a new neural pathway or a new way of looking at life being a little bit harder for you to grab onto and hold on to than somebody else.
Yeah.
I feel like that might have been confusing, but you tell me.
It wasn't confusing at all.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just a thought.
That is a thought I'm having right now.
I love that you gave your side of it, so then they can see how that's what I wanted, is I wanted them to see how your brain worked. So then we flip it and show them how my brain works. So as I was sitting there listening to you talk about this woman, right? I love stories. That's how my brain thinks in. So I was in the story that you were telling me, and my body had a physical response. Like I felt her fear, right? I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what this woman is feeling, because it's triggering the same pathways in me. But then like to watch you as like I'm feeling her, and to watch you talk about it was like, oh, like her brain thinks completely different about this. Like her brain is like accessing possibility from a place of safety and like seeing her safety. And it was this very surreal moment of like, oh, I see how my brain has experienced trauma, like automatically goes to I'm not safe in the world. And how beautiful is Lindsey's brain automatically goes to I'm safe in this world.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was like one like eye-opening moment, like, oh, we don't all think the same. And then that started to the next like aha moment of like, okay, her brain thinks in possibility. Her brain thinks in safety. Mine doesn't. And so what I did then is I started being coached in 2019. And sometimes I was using that as like, why am I not as successful as them? I've been doing all this work since 18. I should be further along. Right.
Yeah.
And when I saw like, oh, her brain thinks in safety, And mine's starting to get there because at that
Yeah.
retreat, I saw that. And at the retreat, you did it well in our whole mastermind together. The belief that the finish line is the same for all of us coaches if we want it. So like all of us could become multimillionaire businesses, right? Like that is possible for all of us. And you did such a great job of instilling that belief in me. I'm sure all the other girls, but like,
Yeah.
okay, the finish line is the same. And then I saw like, oh, 18 to now. Oh, this can make me cry. 18
Aw.
to now has been me trying to like get to the starting line.
Mm.
And it was like, oh, Lindsey started at the starting line. And I've had to spend 18 till now trying to even get to the starting line. So I
Mm.
started 400 meters behind, and my mind went back to higher ed. And in higher ed, they do this like example of where they'll line college students up on a football field on one line, and then you have the other line at the other end. And they'll say, like, if your parents are married, take a step forward. If neither one of your parents have been incarcerated, take another step forward. And back then, I was like, this is such bullshit. Because what it was doing, it was telling me I was a victim.
Mm.
Right. And that I didn't get to start where other kids start. And that felt even more painful. That compounded
Yeah.
what I was going through. So, of course, my brain wanted to reject it and just start us all at the same place.
Yeah.
Right. And when I saw in this experience with you, it was like, okay, she started at the starting line. I had to start 400 meters back, and I have a decision now. I can either decide to look at this and feel sorry for myself and make up excuses for myself, or I can look at it like, you know what? Because me and you are both athletes.
Yeah.
Like, look, I just got a 400-meter practice round. I got more reps in.
Mm.
I got to work on my resilience. I got to work on my
Oh,
perseverance. I
yeah.
got to
That's giving me
build
chills.
those. Yeah. So I can either use it as an asset for me. Like, hell yeah. Like I'm at the starting line now. I've done the work and I'm showing up to the starting line even more with resilience and perseverance and a deep inability to quit at this point.
Mm.
But we're
Oh,
both getting to the finish line.
yeah. Oh, that's such a good way to describe it because I think it offered you like acceptance of where you were and to not make it a problem. And it actually gave you so much more power. Like, I think when it comes to the idea of the victim mindset, it's like that would look like you starting 400 meters back and you going like, well, I can never get there because of this situation, or I'm not capable of that because these things are holding me back. That's very different. Like, I can't think of anything more empowering than saying, I started 400 meters back and I'm going to use it as an asset. And I'm also going to, like, no matter what, fight my way to get to where everybody else is and run past them faster because I just got a warm up lap and now my muscles are warm and theirs aren't even warm yet. So I think that it's just such a powerful example and way to explain it. And it kind of makes me think about sports too, because I played volleyball and I'm relatively small. I'm 5'4", and I played with girls who were like 6'8", like so tall. And I think it's the same kind of a similar situation where it's like, I could have spent all day focused on the fact that I was super short and that the likelihood of me getting a full ride and all of this like would be lower than someone who was taller and all of that. But instead I just focused on like, I could have compassion. Like, yeah, it might be harder for me. Like,
Yeah.
and also, if I spend all my time thinking about that, then I'm not going to get to work to create the skills and the ability to be so good that they literally can't help but not put me on the court and give me a scholarship, even though I am further back. And I think that's really how you're like taking this realization of like, yeah, I don't have the same level of safety in my brain and body that Lindsey has because of my life circumstances. And that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm going to take it. I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to sprint just as fast, if not faster.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because I could have like in 2018, 2019, Kim, especially coming out of higher ed, where it's like all that, the privilege lingo, right? Like, well, she had these privileges. Like, I could have very easily gone into that. but it was like, this
Totally.
doesn't serve me.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
Like, so what? Who cares? Like, we're all starting at different, like, some of us are having to start 800 meters, 1600 meters behind the starting line. We either make it
Mm-hmm.
a problem or we say, you know what? It's time to go to work. And
Mm.
it's not a fucking problem. I'm just going to get some more warm up laps in. I mean, you look
Yeah.
at David Goggins' story, right? I don't know if you've read any of his books.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's amazing. Um,
I'll have to put it
Can't
on my
Hurt
list.
Me, right? And like he started a mile behind the starting line. He had all these things. It just wasn't a fucking problem.
Mm.
And I think that's what the gift that I was able to, that you gave me, I was able to give myself out of this experience is like, okay, it's not that people are special. People just started at different starting lines and it's not a problem because the finish line is the same for us all if we so choose it.
Yes. And I think it's also acknowledging that, but not feeling victimized by it, right? Like, again,
Yeah.
it like you said, like acknowledging that maybe you're 400 yards back, and it would kind of be like, imagine it kind of what you did before, where it's like you tried to convince yourself you were at the starting line and like, no, right? If you spent all your time doing that instead of just being like, here I am, if we were thinking about a physical race, like I'm starting 400 yards back, like this, I'm just acknowledging that,
Yeah.
and then spending all your time figuring out how to run the race instead of resisting this idea, like you're going to get so much further, so much faster.
Yes. Yes. Beautifully said. Yes. Cause that's what I did. I spent so much time at this, like, no, we're all at the starting line.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
circling the starting line, trying to convince myself, like, while people do their race. And it's like, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love working with you. Like, I think people like me that have, I also I had this thought like, oh, people like me that have experienced trauma need a Lindsey in their life. They
Aw.
need to be able to see how a brain that thinks in safety and possibility works. Like they need that example, you
But I
know?
also want to commend you because it's so interesting, because I remember when I first started coaching, I'm like, I've had my, like, I haven't had what I would say like big T trauma. I've had like my own share of
Yeah, you've
how our
lived the
parents
human
messed us up
experience.
in like in our own unique ways. I got my own stuff, but they're
Yeah.
definitely not like that. I don't feel safe in my body or in this world or things like that. I'm very grateful and lucky for that. But I remember when I first started, there were all these like women and coaches who had all these stories. And I remember actually like almost using it against myself. And I remember a coach being really blunt with me because I was like, I don't have this like this background and this like story, and like that she was like, don't wish for that, like you, right? And I wasn't like I was, but I
Right.
felt like, oh no, people aren't going to be inspired by me or like want to learn from me because I don't have the same history that they have. And
Mm-hmm.
what I think is so fun about you, Kim, is that I'm sure there are people in the world, I know there are, that follow me, that learn from me, or that unfollowed me because they are resisting that, right? They're like, oh, it's not fair. They don't like the idea that don't come from a similar experience or background as them. And so they resist the way my brain works and that's even a possibility or accessible for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of fun to think about that. Like instead you choose to see that as a gift.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I think that just to commend you that you see that as a gift where other people might not, and that's totally fine, right? Like that's okay too. But I do think it's really powerful to be able to see it from that lens and access somebody who doesn't have that background. And I think it's also powerful to learn from somebody who does, to see how their brain works and how they've worked through it. But yeah, I think I just want to commend you for that, because I think a lot of people could have very different thoughts about it.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you. And I think too, it's like, cause when you're stuck in victim mindset, and like I'm pretty blunt on this podcast, so that's not gonna shock anybody. But I do think when you're like in victim mindset, it's easy to use it as against yourself. And then to start like criticizing you, like, well, she doesn't know, she doesn't understand. Like 2019 Kim totally would have like done that, right?
Yeah.
But because I've done the work and I've learned about taking responsibility and the power of that, and I do feel empowered in my own mind and body at this point. I just don't, it doesn't, my brain doesn't filter through that victim mindset anymore. It filters like I'm learning how to think in possibility. And you do
Mhm.
such a masterful job of that. So of course my brain's going to watch your brain and like, oh, like see how she filtered that through there, like that
Mhm.
experience through safety. That is now a possibility for you. This is an option
Yes.
for you.
Yes. Oh, that actually reminds me of, it's so funny. So my husband Chris is also a coach, and he has had situations in his life where like people that he really deeply trusts, like he was married, his wife cheated on him, and like he has some other like history like that. And I remember like 3 or 4 years ago, and this has actually really offered me perspective for that too. Um, we were having a conversation, and I'll connect the dots, I promise. But I remember we were talking about being taken advantage of. And
Mhm,
because I have safety, I have a belief. Like,
mhm,
I know in reality, there are situations where people are taken advantage of, where their power has been taken from them. But my lens has always been like, no one can take advantage of me without my permission.
mhm.
And even though I'm sure we joked that there are probably situations where I have been taken advantage of, but I just don't filter it through that lens
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation about it, and I remember like asking, I'm like, but what if you couldn't be taken advantage of? And at the time, it totally triggered him. He was like, we're done with this conversation. And I was like, okay. And then like 3 years later, he's like, okay, now I see what you're talking about. But I think this is so interesting because like I think that is also a place where my brain just has safety, and I just have such a unique lens on things because I haven't had those life situations. But again, hearing your perspective also helps me see, and I do have total compassion always for my clients and people, but like again, not everybody has that same perception of reality, and that it can be very triggering to hear someone be like, nope, people can't take advantage of you. Like that's impossible. So I forget how we got started on like where you were saying that triggered that thought, but I just thought it was really interesting how like same kind of situation that his framework was like, wait, no, I have been, and that's happened many times. And mine was like, wait, that's not even a reality to me.
Yeah. That's what I love about your brain. Because it shows like if your brain filters that way and his filters this way, like then there are like where's the truth lie?
Yeah, it's like it really is just thoughts,
Yeah.
but yeah, but it's like, yeah, it does. It gives just different access to a different way of thinking and being. And
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for that. I also like, I have said this many times, like my dad was an athlete, and he was big on like teaching this stuff, responsibility, all of that. And so I think that also is a huge role that played into the foundational mindset that I have. And
Mhm.
that did like, I've admitted that, like, I'm like, that did put me ahead. And I think so often actually people are really um like they make themselves feel bad for
Mhm.
like acknowledging that maybe something was easier for them.
Mhm.
Like they
Yeah.
think it means that they can't be as proud of what
Right.
they've created.
Mhm.
And I feel like you can be just as proud of what you've created, even if things were like maybe easier for you. And I think that's such a powerful thing to acknowledge. I'm like, yeah, my dad's been teaching me responsibility. And like, I remember him saying, life's not fair. So what are you going to do about it? And it was pretty fair to me, but like he would tell me that. And I'm like, I've been learning that since I could understand language. Of course, that put me
Yeah.
a little bit of head, but that doesn't mean that the possibility isn't there for every single human on this planet.
Right. Yeah. I think you do such a good job of articulating that because I mean I've heard you say that, and I've even asked you questions about that because what my brain was doing, it was trying to find evidence of like how Lindsay's special and different,
Mm-hmm.
how she has a head, like how she has. It's not even a head chance. Like I never got hung up on that. It was just like this like DNA innate specialness that I was never going to be able to work my way into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting how your brain uses almost the exact same thing. You were using it against yourself that you're now using for yourself. I
I
think
think
that's
when I
huge.
figured out that the finish line is the same for all, well, I saw your humanness, right? And then I was like, oh, she's like me. She has a human brain, like sometimes we idealize these people that are very, very successful and like we don't ever meet them. And it's like they're untouchable,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And then to actually meet you and like, okay, I'm breathing the same air that she's breathing. She's a human, just like me. Right. And then it was like, the finish line is the same. And I was like, okay, like, doesn't matter where we start. Like, I get to be at the same finish line as her. I'm not
Mm.
afraid of work. I'll go do the work.
Yeah. Ugh. It can be full body goosebumps. So good.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Like, what would you like to offer our audience or
Hmm. Well, I think that the first thing that came to mind is like, you've worked really hard at deciding to perceive things from the lens that you have. And I just think that's really powerful. So like, if you're hearing this and you feel triggered by it or resistant to it or anything like that, I think just see that as an opportunity for growth, like lean into that, question that. And like just know that what you want is on the other side of being willing to see this example or what we're talking about from a totally different lens. And I truly I think that is just one of my superpowers. I just really believe that any human is capable of creating anything that they want. And I feel like whether you believe that or not, it's just just borrow that for yourself. The thought I've always had for this, and I'm sure this also comes from a place of safety, is like, what's the harm in choosing to believe that?
yeah.
Like, I always thought, isn't my life so much better spending my whole life choosing to believe that anything is possible for me and getting up every day and fighting for that and going after that, rather than how I used to feel before I found coaching? I had this stint where I just kind of forgot all of these tools and learned a bunch of new ones. But I was like, that time in my life where I just didn't think anymore was possible, where I just felt like this is how life was supposed to be. I'm like, that was the worst time in my life. Like, I'd much rather spend my life fighting for that, believing in that, being disappointed and failing, going for that, than spending my life waking up every day and going, well, this is it.
Yeah.
Like, that to me is the worst. So it's like, why not just choose to believe that that possibility exists for you? And then get yourself in the rooms, hire the coaches, do the things you need to do in order to become somebody who truly on a soul level believes that and is willing to show up and fight for that every single day. Like, to me, we talk about sports a lot, but one thing I come back to in myself and what keeps me continuing to grow and push is I have this weird not obsession, but I think about the end of my life a lot. And I when people pass away, it just always it really sits with me.
Mhm.
And I think about that for myself a lot. And I think I think about it from the standpoint of sports, but I'm I just want to feel like I left it all out on the field.
Yeah.
Whether I lose or win the game, I just want to know that I fought every single moment for what I wanted and the possibilities that existed for me.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I just think it's fun for everyone listening to think about it from that lens. What's the harm? And wouldn't my life be a lot more fun and exciting just believing that I can create whatever I wanted and going for it?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because the reality is it's going to be hard either way. So choose your hard.
It's so true. Yeah. it's way harder to just tell yourself that this is it and that you just
Yes.
have to stay stuck here. I'm that's the worst feeling in the world.
Yes. It's so disempowering. And
Yes.
to me, that's the worst feeling. It's feeling disempowered.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is the place where I can always tell in my energy and how I'm living in day-to-day life. If that's where my brain has gone, where I'm I don't have power, I don't have control. That I agree. That is my nemesis. I'm ooh, gosh, I'm totally powerless.
Yeah. Yeah. And I look at I think back to some of the models that when I was living in that, the results I was creating, they created even more suffering. So yeah. I don't like
Yes.
visiting those models.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I also I went to my first funeral when I was in kindergarten.
oh my
My
gosh.
classmate got ran over. So
Oh,
and then all my grandparents had passed away before I was 13. So I just knew death was a non-discriminator. So I also
Mm.
have this very realization, and my parents are older too, of like, it's coming. Like every day I am one day closer to my expiration. And I
Mm.
just don't want to be the woman that like lives in regret. Like I don't like regret, that emotion
Yeah.
either. So it's like
Oh yeah.
I'm going to leave it all out because I'd rather feel embarrassment or failure than be 80 and like regret my entire life. And at
Oh
that
my
point, I
gosh.
can't change it.
Yes. That's exactly how I felt when I first got into this work. I'll never forget. I was like flying on a plane, and it was the first time in years that I felt this sense of like, if something happened, like I'd be so proud, even though I hadn't accomplished even close to what I knew I was capable of yet. The fact that I had just like taken my power back and decided I'm going to
Yes.
go for it and went all in like that day or whatever. I was like, it felt so peaceful.
Yeah.
And so I think it's fun to think about that everyone can feel that in one moment. Like you don't have to achieve all the things that you're imagining you want to achieve. You just have to decide that you can actually do it and just start going for it. Like you will have
Yeah.
that sense of peace that like you won't have regret because you did your part, and you don't get to control necessarily when the expiration date comes. So
Yeah. Yeah. And we're in very different places in our businesses. And I agree with you. I feel that same feeling, like
so
peace. Like, yeah, like even if I like go tomorrow, I'm totally proud of who I became and that I took power back in my life.
oh, that's such a good feeling. Yes.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
it. So
Thank
good.
you so much for being on here,
Yeah.
Lindsay, and sharing.
You're welcome. I had so much fun chatting about this. I think it's like so powerful. I'm excited to like for your audience to hear it,
Yeah.
to hear your story, to hear your lens. I'm sure they've heard it, but just from this perspective.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful to have you share your perspective on here with them too, just to have a different, if they're interested in working with you or connecting with you, I know your favorite place is IG.
Yeah.
And that's at Lindsey Mango. It's LINDSEYMANGO_, correct?
Yep. You
Yeah.
got it.
I'll put it in the show notes too for them. But how else can they connect with you, work with you?
Honestly, I feel like that's the best place to go. And just that's where I talk about all the things. But I have a life membership. That's what Kim is in. That's really fun. I have a mastermind too. But honestly, hire Kim. I don't know like what you're doing. I'm like, you can follow me and watch me, but Kim is a genius. Kim is amazing. The work she does is so life-changing. So if you're looking for somebody, go talk to her.
Yeah. But also follow Lindsay because she is very inspirational, just like like to start getting your brain to think in possibility. So yeah. Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you.